Hello everyone, and today I think it's about time I covered one of Tamron's new lenses. A lot of people have requested me to review this, their new SP 85mm f1.8 VC, part of Tamron's new Super Performance line. It's for full frame or APS-C digital SLR cameras or mirrorless cameras with an adapter and costs about £700 or $750 US, so it's cheaper in America. The last Tamron lens I reviewed was the SP 45mm f1.8 VC, and I was really impressed with it. Its great build quality, sharpness and image stabilization making it a unique and very enjoyable full frame lens to handle. Well, this newer 85mm lens takes things even a step further. No other fast aperture 85mm lens features image stabilization, and it really is a great feature which I personally value highly, especially when you're shooting indoors or in darker situations. Here's some footage without stabilization, and here it is turned on. As you can see, there's a big difference. Video footage is held almost completely steady and your still pictures will be sharper. When you pan or tilt the lens around, the stabilization is also fairly well behaved. And of course, an 85mm f1.8 lens is a classic optic for portrait and subject photography, throwing your background nicely out of focus, especially on a full frame camera. It's also a potentially useful lens for landscape photography, where I find that 85mm gives you just enough compression on your images. If you're using this lens on an APS-C camera, then you'll get images which are the full frame equivalent of 136mm, so a lot tighter, although the smaller camera sensor will also effectively increase your depth of field. Anyone with a lens like this on their camera will simply get tons of use out of it, and image stabilization is an impressive and useful bonus. The lens itself is a little bit large. Other 85mm lenses come smaller and lighter, but its build quality is very good. The body of the lens is made of metal, and it's all based on a metal lens mount with some light weather sealing. Nice. The rubberized focus ring can be turned at any time, whether or not the lens is set to manual focus. It's not the smoothest or most precise focus ring I've ever handled, but it works fine. The autofocus motor is very quiet and very fast. This is probably the fastest autofocus system I've ever seen on a Tamron lens, and its accuracy was pleasingly good in my tests, nailing autofocus through the viewfinder over 90% of the time. Much better than the Sigma 85mm Art lens I recently tested. This Tamron lens comes with a free lens hood, and it accepts 67mm filters. As I said, it's a slightly bulky piece of equipment, but the build quality and functionality is fantastic. So let's see about image quality. First, on a full frame camera, my 20MP Canon 6D. At f1.8, the lens is very sharp in the middle of the image with very good contrast, although it's not quite pin sharp. Impressively though, there's no reduction in sharpness when we look into the corners, and no noticeable chromatic aberration. Great. Stop down to f2.8 for a boost in brightness and a little extra sharpness in those corners and a razor sharp image in the middle. It stays this sharp down to f11, and even at f16 there's only a small drop in sharpness. So on full frame, this is pretty much the sharpest Tamron lens I've ever tested. It's nice. Let's see then how it performs on an APS-C camera, my 24MP Canon EOS M3, a much tougher playing field. At f1.8, sharpness and contrast are just okay in the middle of the image. They're just as good in the corners though. Stop down to f2.8 for a nice improvement in the corners and back in the middle, although just a touch of colour fringing is visible here. The lens remains this sharp even down to f8. It's only at f11 that the effects of diffraction start to kick in and we see a little softness emerging. So it's a less impressive but still good performance from the lens on an APS-C camera. Stop down to f2.8 for best results here. Okay, let's look at vignetting and distortion on a full frame camera. If you look carefully, you can spot just a touch of pincushion distortion, nothing really noticeable. Vignetting at f1.8 though is quite strong. If you want to brighten those corners, then stop down to f2.8 and stop down to f4 to get rid of it altogether. The lens can focus down to about 76mm, which is nicely closer than average for an 85mm lens. The other good news is that, even at f1.8, the image quality close-up remains really nice and sharp. Working against bright light is a traditional weakness of portrait lenses, and this Tamron offering is no exception to the rule. We see soft but prominent flaring and quite a loss of contrast, so use the lens hood to help when shooting outdoors. Finally, bokeh, an important question for such fast aperture lens. On the positive side, out-of-focus backgrounds look really nice and soft. They're a bit better than the bokeh you see on the equivalent Canon lenses, well, in my opinion anyway. However, we do see some typical problems with cat's eye shapes on bright light in the corners of your images, a pretty classic problem for this kind of lens though. Overall, the lens's optics are impressively good. There's plenty of great sharpness and contrast, neutral colours and smooth bokeh, and the build quality and functionality of the lens is second to none. It competes against other new 85mm lenses from Samyang and Sigma. The Samyang and Sigma lenses are a tiny bit sharper than this Tamron offering from what I can see, and they have wider maximum apertures. But the Tamron lens costs less, has more accurate autofocus than the Sigma lens, and has image stabilization. I love that image stabilization. I find it a bit of a game changer, particularly for handheld video work, but it'll make a real difference to your still photography too. So when it comes to mid-range 85mm lenses, we're all really spoiled for choice. Check out my other reviews to help you make your decision if you like, but at the end of the day, this lovely Tamron lens comes highly recommended.